Okay, we're going to begin this story. It's called The Smokescreen. It's a story from Iterum Life Book 3, Ivyhouse Tales, New Bolingbroke, 1970 to 1980. This story from about 1973. The Arabs had decided to jack up the price of oil. It was the early 1970s. The exact year escapes me now, but it was not long after we had moved to Ivy House, where we had oil-fired central heating. There were about 20 radiators in that beautiful house. Some had been made especially to fit under the windows of the kitchen, where we had bench seats, and the remainder were large, big capacity cast iron arrangements, similar to those many of you will remember seeing in your schools. The pipework feeding these was all 1 inch to 2 inches in diameter. It took some oil to power that lot, and even then in the winter the main rooms had open fires as well. Heating efficiency. It was actually during the time of my retirement from the Firestone Corporation, and I still had a good regular income, but even so we decided to change. A change was necessary. I'd already begun to purchase firewood supplies from an annual wood sale at South Ormsby, a large country estate some 15 miles north in the heart of the Lincolnshire Wolds. So we had a good idea of the comparative cost of using timber instead of oil. The timber won hands down, even after only the first few hikes in oil prices. Little did we realise how this one fact was to change all our lives forever. Inflation, something previously unconsidered, became, because it was not there before, it had now come to stay. So what it was to be, and as soon as possible, more research found us two solutions. The first in the form of a Scandinavian type wood burner based on the same principle as a steam engine boiler. Something with enormous capacity to heat the house efficiently and with the burning room to take a lot of wood or straw bales. The second was to be a multi-purpose wood burning cooker that was to be installed in the kitchen and also connected into the heating system. This eventually transformed the large 15-foot square room with high ceilings, and it became the warmest room in the house. We found a specialist dealer in these new fangled wood burning units near to Nottingham. These folk had become the agents for an English made boiler working on the same principle of the long established Scandinavian makes, but with a substantial savings in initial cost. The saving helped purchase the tall stainless steel double skin chimney, which eventually would cost almost as much as the boiler itself. The dealers assured us this would all be needed. This chimney had to be sufficiently tall to clear the adjacent roofs and allow a clear draw of smoke, ensuring the boiler burning properly. This detailed technical information was a steep learning curve, and it was not realised at the time how all this newfangled knowledge would stand us in good stead in later years as we move home and needed to establish wood-burning stoves and cookers in our future homes both in the UK and in France. This installation was entrusted to an Irish plumber, a friend of a friend who lived at Old Leek, some 15 miles to the east. Joe was of an indeterminate age, certainly older than Ruth and myself, just one of those folk who always seems middle-aged and never grew any older. His wife worked at the local Pilgrim General Hospital at the same time as Ruth was working as a theatre sister in the same establishment. The challenge of this unusual conversion Joe just took in his stride. Another chimney. Perhaps it was his Irish ancestry, but nothing seemed to be beyond his ability. In fact, to digress a little here, we had cause to be thankful to Joe a year or two later when some bricks fell out of the inside of the sitting room chimney. This typical Georgian room had a quite lovely large fire basket with attractive cast iron surround. We'd wondered for some little time why, when the fire was always lit, smoke seemed to be increasingly puthering from around the corner window frame, facing out onto the garden, and just where the frame joined the chimney breast. Eventually we could ignore this fact no longer, as the wooden window frame began to discolour with excessive heat. Joe was called in, and the general decision was to insert a wide chimney liner down from the top of the chimney and seal it at the bottom with a sheet of heat-proof material. The extra problem to overcome this time was the fact that the chimney stack was the highest in the entire house. It was at the south side, where the house looked over the walled garden and the terminus of the navigable land drain system with access to Boston. Many times I wish I'd had a camera to record that event. Joe mounted various different ladders to access the very top of the chimney, which reached almost 40 feet in height. A further chimney. I'd actually accessed the kitchen chimney a year or two previously, when we finally decided to use the wood burner cooker, and found the top of this chimney completely sealed by slate, cemented over to keep the weather out. Thinking the task of a simple nature, and access to the chimney possible via a series of wide wall copings, I'd eventually found myself astride the ridge at the very top of the house at the rear, but without sufficient tools to complete the task in hand. After eventually completing the job and not being at my best at any height above head height, I determined that chimneys were to be discovered by somebody else in the future. Back to Joe, and watching Joe mount those numerous ladders and work his way to the very top, stand erect on what looked like the top of the world, and then gradually pull the long length of convoluted steel chimney that trailed over his shoulder and slowly thread it down the offending chimney, was an absolute wonder. The internal liner just above the lounge fire basket was not much narrower than the chimney. It protruded just a little through the fireproof sheet. It was cut and bent into place to be secure. The sheet itself fixed with long steel pins and fire cement. The result was a total success. Back to the boiler. The boiler of choice was called a Danheat, its dimensions something like 8 feet long and 4 feet high. It was round and had a full diameter round door on one end, allowing full width and height access to the inside. We mounted it on a brick plinth, so the base was 3 feet or so from the floor, and my garage was the location of choice, as it was directly connected to the house in a corner, also adjoining the large maltings building at the rear. The whole structure was substantial brick, so no fire risk was ever to occur due to the extensive heat around the boiler itself. The entire round burning area of the boiler was surrounded by a water jacket 2 inches wide. Comprehensive controls for restricting air intake and water temperature were built into the door, which had 2 air inlets controlled by thermostats and springs. Small straw bales were 3 to 4 feet long and about 2 to 3 feet square. Experience taught me that the Danheat could swallow at least 3 of these in one go, and 4 at a real push. Additionally, if the boiler had gone out during the night, or the morning was particularly cold, then the boost of straw and its huge burning efficiency would bring all those radiators into almost instant glowing warmth in a matter of minutes. Danheat would burn anything, but its capacity for consuming wood, and large pieces at that, resulted in another change in circumstances. I bought a couple of old trailers and a second-hand grey Ferguson diesel tractor. I would need a reserve of good dry burning timber, the dimensions of a decent-sized brick double garage and the same height. Fallen trees were sourced from within reasonable travelling distance, and a chainsaw also became part of my life. Eventually, when better organised, I spent most Saturdays in the fine weather sourcing and transporting the timber to ensure good supplies to cover the time where the weather was bad. course, firewood for the 3 open fires in the house was always consequently plentiful. We're turning a page. We've missed one. Here we go. The straw fog. It was the straw that was to cause an unforeseen problem, although in hindsight I suppose it was obvious. At the end of harvest one year, I'd bought 2 complete trailer loads of straw from Herbert Epton, the local haulage contractor, who also supplied many of our early second-hand lorries. The straw was collected direct from one of his fields and parked in our yard close to the garage for easy access. Old lorry sheets were spread to keep it dry, and my plans for quick supplementary heat in the coming winter were complete, or so I thought. The only real problem with burning straw is the smoke. I believe it was the smoke that eventually brought the national ban on burning stubble fields at the end of harvest. It was the smoke that caused my problem too. I did realise that to prevent annoyance to my neighbours and in fact the whole village, I would have to contain the straw burning to hours when most folks were asleep. The result of stuffing 3 whole bales of straw into the boiler and opening all the air inlets was perhaps similar to that splendid wartime epic, the Battle of the River Plate. I think this was perhaps the cruiser Exeter that carried out a heroic attack on that famous German battleship under cover of an enormous, totally engulfing smokescreen. My smoke, though, was yellow and somewhat acrid. It was certainly thick and dense. It only lasted for a few minutes until sufficient flame was built up to consume the straw more quickly. But in those minutes the amount of smoke was astounding. If the wind was from the west, I was safe, as behind the house to the east were large open fields for simply miles. It was one morning before daylight when I unintentionally created something of an incident. It was very cold and damp, so cold the house needed a boost of heat. I opened the garage doors and grabbed 3 bales of straw, stuffing them into the boiler and opening all the air intakes. Nothing unusual in that, or so I thought. But the wind was from the east. I watched the thick yellow smoke emerging from the chimney and carrying across the main road that passed directly in front of Ivy House. I remember thinking that it was a good job that Betty and Les across the road would not be up for an hour or so, and I hoped they slept with their bedroom window closed as the smoke began to carry over towards the whole village. Back in my boiler room, things were warming up nicely. I could soon change to wood fuel as the flames began to build. Outside things had changed a little. Damp air had come with the pre-dawn and brought my smoke closer to the ground. All this I was not aware of until there was a huge screeching of tyres outside on the road. Pushing my head out of the door, I could only see smoke and more smoke. It was everywhere. Then 2 figures in blue uniforms appeared out of the murk, attracted by the light from my boiler room. They had sourced the root of the problem encountered on the road. I was told in no uncertain terms to stop the smoke instantly, as there could be a serious incident as a result. They had been innocently patrolling along the long straight road in the direction of Boston, and then suddenly, without any warning, became engulfed in a yellow acrid fog, so dense they could see nothing beyond their patrol car, until a waft of air had exposed my boiler room light. They inspected the boiler and I explained about the straw and the quick heat. The result was not without some amusement, but serious official recommendations were to only do it when the wind was from the west. The final straw incident. One other incident resulted from that straw experiment. It happened later in the year, in fact close to New Year. There had been a severe fall of snow, substantial in fact. The remaining straw trailer was parked adjacent to the boiler room, but against the neighbouring fence. Ken Rundle lived next door in the bungalow built by Alan Sabula, the lad who had died in that freak accident. The trailer was on its last legs, as it were, elderly and somewhat fragile in places. The snow had found those places, and as I stepped outside to find some straw for an early burn, I realised the trailer was a strange shape. The heavy snowfall had been just too much and overburdened the whole of one side of the trailer. The result was a half load of straw tumbled through the interwoven boundary fence and ending up leaning against the wall of Ken's bungalow. That was one of the most energetic hours I've ever spent. Something like 200 bales of straw had to be unentangled with interwoven fence and bits of broken trailer, then heaved through the gap left by the broken fence and stacked close by. They seemed to reach almost to the eaves of his roof, and I can imagine his not strong sense of humour being aroused if he was to see what I could see. I did manage it, but it was a mess. Crumbled fence and bits of straw bale seemed to spread everywhere. But as dawn eventually broke and all was revealed, at least the stupefying sight of all those straw bales leaning against his house were gone. Just remaining was the evidence of something strange in the deep snow. There we are. Hope you enjoyed that story, a bit longer than usual. Brought to you by Cracker Books, written and read by Keith Sanders. Now we have a new ending to these stories. We have no shop anymore. We don't sell any books or stories, so they're all free to download. Since COVID, we decided to allow free access to all our books, videos and audio stories. You can access them all via our new website, and this is the address: www.itsarumlife.com. That's IT'SARUMLIFE.com.